It is 12:40 in the morning. A woman is dead. A 19-year-old boy is bleeding out in a parking lot in Vallejo, California. He can barely speak, but he is trying. And 40 minutes later, a phone rings inside the Vallejo Police Department. Dispatcher Nancy Slover picks up. The voice on the other end is calm. Too calm. The caller gives directions to the bodies. He uses specific details. Details that only someone who was there could possibly know. Then he says something else. Something that changes everything. He tells Nancy Slover he was also responsible for 2 teenagers murdered 7 months earlier on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. Then he hangs up and walks away into the night. This is not the beginning of the story. This is not even close to the end. This man will go on to taunt police for 5 more years. He will send coded messages that take 51 years to fully solve. He will claim 37 victims. He will give investigators his DNA, his fingerprints, and his handwriting. And still, they will never find him. He will sign every letter the same way, with 5 words. 5 calm, deliberate, controlled words. This is the Zodiac speaking. But here is the question that has haunted investigators, cryptographers, detectives, families, and an entire nation for over 50 years. Who was he? And is he still out there? Welcome to Truth Finder Afiz. This is your case of the day. The Zodiac Killer. Arguably the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit subscribe right now. We do not sensationalize here. We do not dramatize. We follow the evidence step by step the way it should be followed. And we want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. We read every single one. Now let us get into it. Because the man on that phone did not start with a phone call. He started 5 nights before Christmas in 1968 on a cold and empty road in Benicia, California. And 2 teenagers who had only known each other for 2 weeks were sitting in a parked car on their very first date. They never made it home. On December 20th, 1968, 17-year-old David Arthur Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were on their first official date together. Betty Lou was an honor student. David was a wrestler. They had only known each other for 2 weeks. When they left Betty Lou's house that evening, she promised her parents they would be home by 11 o'clock. The 2 teenagers attended a Christmas music concert at Betty Lou's school earlier that evening and stopped to visit a mutual friend before heading out alone. At approximately 10:15 in the evening, David parked his mother's Rambler station wagon at a gravel turnout on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, Solano County, California. It was a known lover's lane. Teenagers parked there regularly. It was ordinary in every way. Sometime shortly after 11 o'clock that night, both David and Betty Lou were shot dead. Betty Lou Jensen was found 30 feet from the car with 5 bullet wounds in her back. She had been running. She did not make it far. David Arthur Faraday was found beside the Rambler with a single gunshot wound to the head at close range. The weapon used was a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. David was still alive when officers from the Benicia Police Department arrived on the scene. He died on the way to hospital. A local resident named Stella Borges was driving past that stretch of Lake Herman Road when she discovered the 2 teenagers and immediately alerted police. There were no witnesses to the attack itself. There was no evidence of robbery. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Bullet holes found in the roof and back window of the Rambler suggested the killer may have fired warning shots first to force the victims out of the vehicle. Investigators could find no motive other than what one officer described simply as the work of a madman. Despite an intense investigation in the weeks and months that followed, no viable suspect emerged. The case sat, unsolved, for 7 months. And then it happened again. On July 4, 1969, 22-year-old Darlene Elizabeth Farron and 19-year-old Michael Renaud Mageau drove to Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California. Blue Rock Springs was just minutes from Lake Herman Road, where Betty Lou and David had been killed 7 months earlier. Darlene Farron was popular in Vallejo. She worked at a local restaurant where she had met Michael Mageau. The 2 went out together on the evening of July 4th, despite the fact that Darlene was married. After 11:30 that night, Darlene received a phone call at her house. At approximately 11:50 p.m., she picked up Mageau, and the 2 noticed almost immediately that a car was following them. Trying to lose the vehicle, they turned into the parking lot at Blue Rock Springs Park. The car behind them followed and parked nearby. Then it left. Thinking the threat had passed, the couple relaxed. But just minutes later, the same car returned. It blocked their exit. A man stepped out holding a flashlight. He approached the driver's side window and opened fire without warning. He shot Darlene multiple times and shot Majo. Then he walked away. Then he came back and shot them both again. 3 teenagers who were also in the park that night found Darlene and Michael and called for help. Police arrived at 12:20 in the morning. Darlene Elizabeth Farron was pronounced dead at 12:40 a.m. Michael Majo survived. Barely. From his hospital bed, Majo described the shooter to police. He said the attacker was a stocky white male approximately 26 to 30 years old, standing about 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing around 200 pounds with short light brown curly hair and a large face. That description was written down, distributed, and it went nowhere. But then something happened that no investigator expected. The killer called them. Approximately 40 minutes after the attack at Blue Rock Springs Park, a call came into the Vallejo Police Department. Dispatcher Nancy Slover answered. The caller said these exact words: "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." He hung up. Investigators confirmed that every detail the caller provided was accurate. The details matched the scene. This was not a prank. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate. He wanted them to know it was him. But the Vallejo call was not the only time this killer reached out to police by phone. On September 27, 1969, after attacking 2 more victims at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, the killer drove 27 miles from the crime scene to a car wash in downtown Napa, California. From there, he used a payphone to call the Napa County Sheriff's Department at 7:40 in the evening. He told the dispatcher he wished to report a murder. No, a double murder. He then confessed to the attack. And he did not hang up the phone. When KVON radio reporter Pat Stanley arrived at that payphone just minutes later, the receiver was still hanging off the hook. The payphone was located just a few blocks from the sheriff's office. Detectives arrived and lifted a wet palm print from the phone. They were never able to match it to any suspect. 3 separate calls to law enforcement. 3 times he announced himself. 3 times he walked away. And 3 weeks after the Blue Rock Springs attack, he did something else entirely. He wrote to them. Before the letters, there was one more attack. On September 27, 1969, 20-year-old Brian Calvin Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia and Shepard drove to Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California, for an afternoon picnic on the shores of the lake. It was a warm afternoon. The lake was calm. At some point during the afternoon, a man appeared on the shoreline and approached the couple. He was wearing an executioner-style hood over his head. He wore sunglasses to hide his eyes, and on his chest was a symbol, a circle intersected by a cross. He held them at gunpoint. He asked for money and their car keys. He told Cecilia to tie up Brian. Then he tied Brian himself more tightly. He then produced a knife and stabbed both of them multiple times. He left them for dead on the shore of Lake Berryessa. Before leaving the attack site, he wrote a message on the door of their car. The message detailed the crime and listed 3 dates. December 20th, 1968. July 4th, 1969. September 27th, 1969. Each date was signed with the crosshair symbol. Sherwood Morrill of the California Department of Justice examined the writing on the car door and concluded it was written by the same person who authored the letters that would soon arrive at Bay Area newspapers. Brian Hartnell survived his injuries. He had sustained 8 stab wounds to the back. He would later describe the attacker in significant detail. Cecilia and Shepard did not survive. She died from her injuries on September 29, 1969 at Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa, California. Brian Calvin Hartnell was one of only 2 people who ever came face-to-face with the Zodiac killer and lived. What he saw that afternoon on the shore of Lake Berryessa would inform the investigation for decades. 2 weeks after Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac struck for the final confirmed time. At approximately 9:40 in the evening on October 11, 1969 in downtown San Francisco, the Zodiac hailed a taxicab. The cab was driven by 29-year-old Paul Lee Stein. Paul Stein was not just a cab driver, he was a doctoral candidate. His brother Joe Stein, who was 34 years old, would later tell the media that Paul was just months away from completing his postgraduate education. Joe Stein would go on to publicly challenge the Zodiac killer by releasing his own work schedule and home address to the San Francisco Examiner. He was not afraid. Paul Stein was. But Paul Stein did not know what was sitting in the back of his cab that night. The Zodiac gave Paul a destination in Presidio Heights. When the cab arrived at Washington and Maple Streets, the passenger asked to go one more block. At the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets at approximately 9:55 in the evening, the Zodiac shot Paul Lee Stein once in the head. He then took Stein's wallet and car keys. He tore off a piece of Stein's shirt, and he wiped down the inside of the cab. 3 teenagers watching from a house directly across the street saw the entire thing. The Zodiac's face was clearly visible under the streetlight. They called police immediately. 2 officers named Donald Fouke and Eric Zelms responded to the scene. They passed a man walking on the street matching the general description of the suspect. But the police radio dispatch had incorrectly described the suspect as a black male. Fouke and Zelms were looking for someone else. They let the man walk past. The Zodiac walked directly past 2 police officers who were standing feet away and disappeared into the darkness of the Presidio. He was never seen again with any certainty. 2 partial fingerprints from the killer's right hand were recovered from the exterior of the cab. Paul Lee Stein's murder would not be connected to the previous Zodiac attacks until a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle containing a bloody piece of Stein's shirt. October 11, 1969. That was the last confirmed Zodiac murder. But the letters had only just begun. On August 1, 1969, 3 letters arrived simultaneously at 3 Bay Area newspaper offices. One went to the San Francisco Chronicle. One went to the San Francisco Examiner. One went to the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each letter was nearly identical. Each one began with these words: "I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl last 4th of July." The letters were filled with deliberate misspellings. Each letter contained a different section of a coded message. Together, the 3 sections formed a cipher of 408 symbols that would become known as the Z408. The killer demanded all 3 newspapers publish the ciphers on their front pages. If they did not, he threatened to kill a dozen people that weekend. The newspapers complied. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was different. In the first line of that letter, the writer identified himself for the first time. He wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He signed it with a symbol, a circle divided by a cross, resembling the crosshairs of a rifle sight. From that moment forward, he had a name, and the investigation would never be the same. Over the years that followed, the Zodiac sent at least 37 confirmed letters. To newspapers, to police departments, to attorney Melvin Belli, to San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, to the Los Angeles Times. Every single one signed the same way, the crosshairs, and the words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The complete timeline of confirmed letters is as follows. On August 1, 1969, the first 3 letters and the Z408 cipher were sent simultaneously to the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. On August 4, 1969, a follow-up letter was sent to the San Francisco Examiner in which the killer first used the name Zodiac. On October 13, 1969, following the murder of Paul Stein, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle with a piece of Stein's bloodied shirt enclosed alongside a bus bomb threat. On November 8, 1969, a card known as the Dripping Pen card arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. On November 9, 1969, what became known as the Death Machine letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle threatening to blow up a school bus. On December 20, 1969, a letter was sent directly to celebrity defense attorney Melvin Belli in San Francisco. In that letter, the Zodiac wrote that he could not remain in control and asked for Belli's help. On June 26, 1970, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle enclosing a map of the San Francisco Bay Area with a Phillips 66 logo and a modified symbol drawn on Mount Diablo alongside the Z32 cipher. The letter claimed the cipher would reveal where the Zodiac had buried a bomb. The bomb was never found. The cipher was never solved. On July 26, 1970, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle referencing the abduction of Kathleen Johns on Highway 132. On October 27, 1970, a Halloween card arrived addressed to reporter Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle with the words "Peekaboo, you are doomed." On March 13, 1971, a letter arrived at the Los Angeles Times. On March 22, 1971, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle hinting at the disappearance of 25-year-old nurse Donna Lass from State Line, Nevada, with an advertisement from Forest Pines condominiums near Incline Village at Lake Tahoe. The postcard included the words "Sought Victim 12" with the Zodiac symbol. And then came the last confirmed letter. January 29, 1974. The Zodiac wrote to the San Francisco Chronicle one final time. But this letter was different from everyone before it. Instead of threatening, instead of boasting, instead of sending a cipher, he wrote a sarcastic review of the film The Exorcist. He called it the best satirical comedy he had ever seen. In that same letter, he noted his victim count as 37-0 in his favor against the San Francisco Police Department. And then, silence. No more letters. No more calls. No more ciphers. Just silence. And a case that would remain open for decades. Of all the weapons the Zodiac used against investigators, none were more powerful than his ciphers. He sent 4 of them in total. Each one different. Each one designed to confuse. The first was the Z408. Sent July 31, 1969 in 3 parts to 3 different newspapers. 408 characters combined. The killer wrote with it, "In this cipher is my identity." Police could not crack it. Professional codebreakers could not crack it. Then a high school teacher from Salinas, California named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty sat down and solved it within days. Their method was precise. They used frequency analysis and they made one key assumption. They assumed the killer was deeply self-centered. So they looked for the most common letter in the English language that would open a self-centered sentence. They looked for the word I. Once they found it, the pattern began to break open. They identified the double symbol structure and connected it to the letters L and L followed by I, which created the word kill. That single word unlocked the entire cipher. What the Z408 revealed was deeply disturbing. The killer stated that he liked killing people because it was so much fun. He wrote that he was collecting slaves for his afterlife. He believed that everyone he killed would serve him after death. He was not killing for money. Not for revenge. Not for any motive investigators could trace to a specific grievance. He was killing for something he believed was far larger than himself. But the Z408 did not give investigators what they needed most. A name. The last 18 characters of the decoded message read EBEORIETEMETHHPITI. They appeared to be random. Some cryptanalysts believe they are deliberate filler. Others believe those 18 letters can be rearranged to reveal the Zodiac's real name. The problem is that those 18 characters can produce 741 trillion possible transpositions. 741 trillion. No confirmed answer has ever emerged from those 18 letters. And then came the second cipher. The Z340. Named for its 340 characters, it was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle on November 8, 1969. For 51 years, this cipher defeated everyone who attempted to solve it. Professional cryptographers tried and failed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation examined it and failed. The National Security Agency examined it and failed. Amateur investigators from around the world worked on it for decades and failed. Then, on December 5, 2023, people working together across 3 different countries finally cracked it. David Oranchak was a software developer from the United States. Sam Blake was a mathematician from Australia. Jarl van Eyck was a programmer from Belgium. Together they built a program called ACE Decrypt, which was capable of running 650,000 possible decryption routes simultaneously. After 51 years of silence, the Z340 gave up its secret. But it did not give up a name. The decoded message denied that the Zodiac had been the caller on a television show at the height of the investigation, and it taunted law enforcement with the words, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me." For 51 years, investigators and amateur sleuths and the families of victims had hoped that the Z340 would contain the Zodiac's real identity. It did not. He was still laughing. From across 5 decades. The third cipher was the Z32, sent June 26, 1970 alongside the Phillips 66 map letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. 32 characters. The Zodiac claimed the cipher, along with the map of Mount Diablo, would reveal where he had buried a bomb capable of blowing up a school bus. The bomb was never found. The cipher was never solved. Investigative consultant Alex Baber would later claim to have decrypted the Z32 as part of his 2025 investigation into the Zodiac's identity, though that claim has not been independently confirmed. And then there was the fourth and final cipher, the Z13, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in April 1970. Just 13 characters, the shortest of all 4 ciphers, and perhaps the most significant, because the Z13 was preceded by 3 words that the Zodiac himself wrote. "My name is," followed by 13 symbols. "My name is," he wrote his own name in code, and handed it to them, and for more than 50 years nobody could read it. According to David Oranchak, who helped crack the Z340, the Z13 is practically impossible to definitively solve due to how short it is. Hundreds of solutions have been proposed. None have been verified. But in 2025, investigative consultant Alex Baber, using artificial intelligence to generate 71 million possible 13-letter names, and then cross-referencing those names against military marriage census and other public records, claimed he had finally identified what those 13 characters said. That name, and who Baber believes it belongs to, will become the centerpiece of the most recent and most significant development in this case. We will get to that. But first we need to understand exactly why this killer was never caught. On the night of March 22, 1970, 22-year-old Kathleen Johns was driving alone from San Bernardino, California to Petaluma, California to visit her mother. She was 7 months pregnant. Her 10-month-old infant daughter was in the car seat beside her. She was traveling westbound on Highway 132, near Interstate 580, in an area west of Modesto, California. At some point during the drive, a car appeared behind her. It began honking and flashing its headlights. A man drove up alongside her and shouted from his window that one of her rear wheels was loose and that she needed to pull over. She pulled over. The man retrieved a lug wrench from his own vehicle and walked to the rear of her car. He appeared to be tightening the wheel. What he was actually doing was removing the lug nuts entirely. When Kathleen Johns pulled back onto the highway seconds later, the wheel came completely free from the car. The same man pulled over beside her again. He offered to drive her to the nearest gas station. She had no other option. She accepted. He drove past the gas station without stopping. He kept driving. For 2 hours he drove Kathleen Johns and her infant daughter across the region between Stockton and Patterson, California. During those 2 hours he told her repeatedly and calmly, "You know I am going to kill you." At some point the car stopped suddenly. Kathleen Johns grabbed her infant daughter. She jumped out of the car. And she ran. She hid in an irrigation ditch beside the road. The man searched for her in the dark with a flashlight. He swept the beam across the field, back and forth. Then eventually he stopped. And he drove away. A passing farmer found Kathleen Johns and her baby and drove them to a police station in Patterson, California. Inside that station, Kathleen Johns saw a wanted poster on the wall. It was the sketch produced from the Paul Stein murder in San Francisco 4 months earlier. She looked at the face on that poster, and she said, "Oh my God, that's him." Her car was later found on Highway 132 where she had left it. It was in flames. Kathleen Johns was 22 years old. She was 7 months pregnant. She had a 10-month-old baby in the car. And the man who told her he was going to kill her walked away. Again. While this incident is suspected by investigators to be a Zodiac attack, it has never been formally confirmed. But Kathleen Johns identified him from the Stein murder poster, and her car burned on the same highway where he abandoned her. To understand why this case was never solved, you have to understand the structure of the investigation itself. The Zodiac killer attacked victims across multiple jurisdictions in Northern California. He killed in Benicia, which sits in Solano County. He killed in Vallejo, which also sits in Solano County. He killed at Lake Berryessa, which sits in Napa County. And he killed in the city of San Francisco. 4 separate jurisdictions. 4 separate agencies. 4 separate chains of command. The agencies involved in the Zodiac investigation included the California Department of Justice based in Sacramento, the Federal Bureau of Investigation based in Washington, D.C., the Vallejo Police Department based in Vallejo, California, the Napa County Sheriff's Office based in Napa, California, the Solano County Sheriff's Office based in Fairfield, California, the San Francisco Police Department based in San Francisco, California, and the Riverside Police Department based in Riverside, California in connection with the Sherry Joe Bates case. In 1969, there was no national DNA database. There was no digital fingerprint matching system. There was no centralized case management platform. Investigators were working with photographs, written notes, and physical file folders stored in different buildings in different cities. Information was shared inconsistently between agencies. Leads were pursued independently. Some departments were not communicating with each other at all. The Zodiac had chosen his crime scenes carefully, and they fell across county and city lines in a way that fractured the response to his crimes. Whether that was deliberate or coincidental remains unknown. But the result was devastatingly clear. The San Francisco Police Department alone had investigated an estimated 2,500 individual suspects by 2009. 2,500 people looked at, interviewed, cleared. Every single one ruled out. In April 2004, under the weight of that caseload and with no active leads, the San Francisco Police Department marked the Zodiac case inactive. They gave up. Then, in 2006, they reopened it. They came back. In 2018, the Vallejo Police Department attempted to use GEAD-Match as part of their investigation. GEAD-Match is a genealogy database tool that had successfully been used to identify the Golden State Killer earlier that same year through investigative genetic genealogy. It worked there. It did not work here. No public results were ever announced from the Zodiac GED-Match attempt. And through all of it, through all 2,500 suspects, through all the agencies, through all the failed technology attempts, one name kept surfacing. One man investigators kept returning to. For 20 years. Arthur Lee Allen. Behind every open case file are the people who chose not to close it. San Francisco Police Department detectives Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong were assigned to the Zodiac case following the murder of Paul Lee Stein in October 1969. Together they began what would become one of the most consuming investigations in American law enforcement history. Over time, Armstrong moved to other assignments. But Toschi stayed. He worked the Zodiac case by himself. He filled 8 filing cabinets with potential suspects' leads and evidence. 8 filing cabinets. 1 detective. 1 case. In 1976, Toschi told the Associated Press that the Zodiac's letters were an ego game. He believed the killer lived somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area. He told reporters, he is a weekend killer. Why can he not get away Monday through Thursday? Does his job keep him close to home? I would speculate he maybe has a menial job, is well thought of, and blends into the crowd. I think he is quite intelligent and better educated than someone who misspells words as frequently as he does in his letters. But the pressure of the Zodiac case eventually took its toll on Toschi. After 7 years of working the investigation, he began writing anonymous letters to San Francisco Chronicle columnist Armistead Maupin praising his own investigative work on the Zodiac case. In 1978, it was discovered that Toschi had written those letters. He was removed from the Zodiac case, demoted to pawn shop detail, the lead detective on the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. Removed in 1978. The case continued without him. Down in Napa County, Detective Ken Narlow had been assigned to the Zodiac case from the very beginning following the Lake Berryessa attack. He worked that case until the day he retired in 1987. 20 years. On a single case. Retired without an answer. In 2010, Dave Toschi, who had spent more than a decade on the investigation, stated publicly that all of the evidence against the primary suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, had ultimately turned out to be negative. 20 years of investigation. Negative. Arthur Lee Allen was born on December 18, 1933 in Honolulu, Hawaii. He grew up in Vallejo, California. He had a strained and complicated relationship with his mother throughout his life. On December 13, 1951, Allen entered the United States Navy. He served until his honorable discharge on December 12, 1959. During his time in service, Allen served on multiple submarines and was stationed in Southeast Asia, earning the China Service Medal for that service. After leaving the Navy, Allen returned to California and became an elementary school teacher. By 1971, his name had reached investigators. A former friend of Allen's named Don Cheney went to police with concerns. Cheney told detectives that in 1969 Allen had spoken to him about wanting to hunt human beings. He had spoken specifically about wanting to shoot young couples at lovers' lanes using a gun fitted with a flashlight attached to the barrel. And he had told Cheney that he wanted to call himself the Zodiac. Multiple friends of Allen's confirmed separately that he had used that name before the killings began. That he had spoken about writing a book about a serial killer named the Zodiac. That he liked to shoot at animals and had spoken openly about extending that behavior to humans. The circumstantial connections between Allen and the Zodiac were significant. Allen wore a Zodiac brand Sea Wolf wristwatch. The Zodiac brand uses a crosshair's logo similar to the killer's symbol. Allen lived just minutes from Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, where Darlene Ferrin was shot on July 4, 1969. His shoe size matched boot prints found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. He used the same type of ammunition as some Zodiac attacks. A letter sent to the Riverside Police Department in connection with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates was printed with either Elite or Pica typeface on a Royal typewriter. During a 1991 search of Allen's residence, investigators seized a Royal typewriter with Elite type. On October 6, 1969, just 9 days after the Lake Berryessa attack, Detective John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department interviewed Allen. Allen had been placed in the vicinity of Lake Berryessa on September 27, the day Cecilia and Shepard was stabbed and killed. Allen told Lynch he had planned to go to Lake Berryessa that day but changed his mind at the last moment and went scuba diving at Salt Point State Park instead. An alibi, placing him near the crime scene. On the same day, on September 14, 1972, investigators obtained a search warrant for Allen's trailer in Santa Rosa, California. Officers searched his trailer, his cars, and his personal possessions. They were looking for clothing, firearms, and ammunition. They were specifically looking for a pistol fitted with a flashlight attached to its barrel. They were also looking for Paul Stein's wallet, his car keys, and the missing piece of his bloodied shirt. Nothing conclusive was found. In 1974, Allen was arrested for lewd conduct with a 9-year-old boy. He pleaded guilty. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital in California for pre-sentence evaluation and treatment. On May 13, 1977, Allen received a suspended prison sentence and 5 years of felony probation. He completed his probation successfully in 1982. It is worth noting that the last confirmed Zodiac letter arrived on January 29, 1974. Allen was arrested and sent to Atascadero that same year. A possible Zodiac letter appeared in 1978, the year Allen was released from Atascadero. That timing has never been explained. In 1991, a former nemesis of Allen's named Ralph Spinelli told the Vallejo Police Department that Allen had admitted to him personally that he was the Zodiac killer. Investigators obtained a second search warrant for Allen's residence and conducted a new search. Items of interest were found. Still not enough for an arrest. Then on August 16, 1991, something happened that should have changed everything. Surviving victim Michael Mageau was shown a photo lineup of driver's license photographs from 1968. He studied the photographs carefully. Then he pointed at one of them. He said, "That's him. It's the man who shot me." He had pointed at Arthur Lee Allen, a man who had been shot, a man who had survived. Pointing 22 years later at the face of the man he said had tried to kill him. And still, not enough for an arrest. Because other witnesses told a very different story. Dispatcher Nancy Slover, who had received the phone call from the Zodiac on the night of the Blue Rock Springs shooting, stated clearly that Allen did not sound like the man she had spoken to on the phone. Officer Donald Fouke, who along with Officer Eric Zelms had potentially seen the Zodiac walking away from the Stein murder scene in San Francisco, said Alan weighed approximately 100 pounds more than the man he saw that night. He said Alan's face was too round. Handwriting experts who examined the Zodiac letters concluded that Alan's handwriting did not match the letters. And fingerprints lifted from the crime scenes and from the letters did not match Alan's fingerprint records. Arthur Lee Allen died on August 26, 1992 from kidney failure. He was 58 years old. He died in Vallejo, California. He denied being the Zodiac until his death. 2 days after his death, investigators served another search warrant at his residence. They were still looking, even after he was gone. In 2002, forensic scientist Sidney Holt of the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab developed a partial DNA profile from saliva found on stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac letters, specifically from the stamp on the November 8, 1969 card. The work was done for the ABC News program Primetime Thursday. The profile was compared to Arthur Lee Allen's DNA. It did not match. It was also compared to Don Chaney's DNA. It did not match. Both men were excluded. In 2010, Dave Toschi stated that all the evidence against Arthur Lee Allen had ultimately turned out to be negative. The only man investigators ever formally named as a suspect. All evidence negative. And in October 2024, Netflix released a 3-episode documentary series titled This is the Zodiac Speaking. The series debuted on October 23, 2024 and examined Arthur Lee Allen directly. It included new testimony from a family who had been friends of Allen, including claims that Allen had admitted to being the Zodiac before his death in 1992. No law enforcement agency has formally confirmed those admissions. The 2002 DNA profile should have advanced this case significantly. It did not, because the sample itself had a fundamental problem. Zodiac researcher Tom Voigt, who has investigated this case for decades, stated in 2018 that the DNA material used to build that partial profile was collected from the outside of the stamp on the November 1969 card. No genetic material was obtained from behind the stamp. No material was obtained from the seal of the envelope. No material was obtained from anywhere that would more certainly have belonged to the person who sent the letter. The DNA could belong to a postal worker, an editor, a police officer, an evidence handler, anyone who touched that stamp over the course of 5 decades. The sample had also degraded significantly. It was only a partial profile, meaning it could not be conclusively matched to any individual with absolute scientific certainty. In 2018, 2 letters were sent to an independent laboratory in hopes of recovering additional usable DNA. The results were never made public. That same year, the Vallejo Police Department attempted to use GEDmatch. GEDmatch had helped crack the identity of the Golden State Killer by uploading a DNA profile to a genealogy database and building family trees from distant relatives, working backwards to narrow the suspect pool. It had worked spectacularly in that case. In the Zodiac case, it produced no public results. As of 2025, investigators have re-examined evidence from the Zodiac letters and crime scenes using the most advanced forensic technology currently available. Advances in forensic genetic genealogy and full genome analysis have raised new hopes. But as of mid-2025, no definitive match has been publicly announced. Officials have stated they remain optimistic. But the DNA file remains open, unresolved. Arthur Lee Allen was the only suspect investigators ever formally and publicly named in the Zodiac case. But he was far from the only person investigated. The San Francisco Police Department investigated approximately 2,500 suspects over the course of the investigation, and several names have emerged over the decades that go well beyond Allen. The first is Lawrence Kane. In the 1980s, retired police detective Harvey Hines began building a case around Lawrence Kane. His work produced 3 separate witness identifications. Kathleen Johns, the pregnant woman abducted on Highway 132 in March 1970, identified Kane from a photo lineup as the man who had held her captive. Darlene Farron's sister Linda identified a photo of Kane as the man she had seen harassing Darlene in a Vallejo restaurant before her murder. Officer Donald Fouke, who had possibly seen the Zodiac walking away from the Stein murder scene, stated that Lawrence Kane resembled the man he had seen that night more than any other person he had ever looked at in connection with the case. And Kane had lived in South Lake Tahoe, California, where he worked at the Sahara Tahoe Casino. Donna Lass, the nurse who disappeared in September 1970, also worked at the Sahara Tahoe Casino. 3 witnesses. 1 location connecting Kane to a suspected victim. No arrest. No charges. No resolution. The second name is Earl Van Best Jr. Earl Van Best Jr. was identified as a suspect by his own son Gary L. Stewart, who wrote a book making the case that his biological father was the Zodiac killer based on handwriting comparisons and circumstantial evidence. Law enforcement did not formally pursue Van Best Jr. He died before any formal investigation could be completed. Then, in October 2021, a group calling themselves the Casebreakers made a public and significant claim. The group included over 40 former law enforcement professionals, including former FBI officials, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and forensic scientists. They were led in part by University of Maryland senior lecturer Tom Moriello. They publicly named Gary Francis Post as the Zodiac killer. Post had been a house painter who lived in Zephyr Cove, Nevada. He died in 2018. Television news anchor Dale Julin had been investigating Post as a Zodiac suspect since at least 2014. In 2017, Julin filed court affidavits stating that he had personally interviewed Gary Francis Post and that Post had admitted during that interview to being the Zodiac killer. The case breakers cited 20 witnesses who supported their conclusion. They cited a paint-splattered wristwatch believed purchased from a military base, military-style boot prints of matching style and size to those found at Lake Berryessa, hair color matching strands found at the scene of Sherry Jo Bates' murder in Riverside, scars on Post's forehead matching witness descriptions of the Zodiac's physical appearance. And in 2023, a claimed FBI whistleblower told the casebreakers that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had considered Post a suspect since as far back as 2016. But there was a problem, a significant one. The biological evidence recovered from under Sherry Jo Bates' fingernails, including hair, skin, and blood, remained in the custody of the Riverside, California Police Department. The Riverside Police Department had maintained since their original investigation that the Zodiac killer was not responsible for Bates' death. That is a position they maintain to this day. The case breakers were denied access to that DNA evidence. The evidence exists. It is being withheld. Law enforcement agencies at the federal level rejected the case breakers' conclusions. The FBI stated the investigation remained ongoing. Another name that appears in the official suspect file is Jack Terrence. Terrence was investigated due to claims made by his stepson Dennis Kaufman, who said Terrence resembled the composite sketch of the Zodiac. Kaufman produced what he claimed was incriminating evidence, including a roll of film depicting possible victims and a hooded costume similar to the one worn at Lake Berryessa. On a 2007 Discovery Channel documentary, a document examiner stated that Terrence's handwriting matched the Zodiac letters. However, law enforcement officials ultimately dismissed Kaufman's evidence. The hooded costume he produced was considered much cruder than what the surviving victims had described. Other suspects considered viable at various points in the investigation include Giuseppe Bevilacqua, Paul Dorr, Richard Gaikowski, Richard Marshall Ross Sullivan, and Jim Mordecai, who was suspected by members of his own family, including his granddaughter. Richard Grinnell, who runs the website Zodiac Ciphers, stated in 2022 that there are probably 50 to 100 new suspects named in this case every single year. 50 to 100 new suspects every year for over 50 years. Of all the developments in the Zodiac case in recent years, none has attracted more attention from law enforcement and the public than the investigation conducted by Alex Baber, a consultant who runs a firm called Cold Case Consultants of America. Baber's findings were reported by the Los Angeles Times in 2025 and have since been presented to multiple law enforcement agencies, including a formal interagency group convened specifically to examine his evidence. That interagency group included representatives from the San Francisco Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, the Solano County Sheriff's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Baber's primary suspect is a man named Marvin Skipton Margolis. Margolis, also known by the alias Marvin Merrill, was born in Chicago in 1925. In 1943, at the age of 18, he joined the United States Navy. He served as a corpsman with the 1st Marine Division and was stationed overseas for 27 months, taking part in the Okinawa Campaign in the South Pacific during World War II. It was during his service in Okinawa that Baber believes Margolis developed both his surgical skills and his marksmanship through his work in the Navy Medical Corps. During the Battle of Okinawa, Margolis was buried alive in a cave. He was forced to dig his way out. Following that experience, Margolis was described by those who knew him as deeply resentful with a pronounced affinity for aggression. After returning from the war, Margolis enrolled at the University of Southern California as a 21-year-old pre-medical student with ambitions to become a surgeon. It was there that his path crossed with a 22-year-old Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth Short is known posthumously as the Black Dahlia. Short and Margolis had met the previous summer in Chicago. By October 1946, the two were living together with friends in an apartment on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles. Their relationship unraveled. Short reportedly confided in friends that she feared a jealous former boyfriend might endanger her life. On January 15, 1947, Elizabeth Short's mutilated body was discovered in a Los Angeles park. She was 22 years old. Her murder became one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. In the grand jury investigation into her murder, Marvin Margolis was listed as a suspect. Grand jury records noted specifically that Margolis was the only pre-medical student who had ever lived as a boyfriend with Elizabeth Short. Despite that notation, Margolis was eventually cleared of the murder by the Los Angeles Police Department, partly due to an alibi. But as Short's murder made headlines in 1947, Margolis fled Los Angeles. He moved between Chicago, Atlanta, Arizona, and Kansas. And he changed his name. He adopted the alias Marvin Merrill. He lived under that name, according to Social Security records, for the rest of his life. Margolis died of cancer in Santa Barbara, California on July 22, 1993. His gravestone at Riverside National Cemetery bears the name Margolis. Now, Alex Baber's investigation connects Margolis not only to the Black Dahlia murder but directly to the Zodiac killings. Baber used artificial intelligence to generate 71 million possible 13-letter names that could fit the Z13 cipher. He then cross-referenced those 71 million names against military marriage census and other publicly available records using known details about the Zodiac's physical description and background. Gradually, the list narrowed, until Baber arrived at one name: Marvin Merrill, the alias adopted by Marvin Margolis after fleeing Los Angeles in 1947. Beyond the cipher, Baber points to additional evidence. He claims circumstantial links connect Margolis to the Lake Berryessa attack through alleged access to a military-style bayonet of the type used in that stabbing. He cites handwriting similarities between the Zodiac letters and correspondence attributed to the Black Dahlia case killer. He cites geographic proximity to the relevant crime scenes. And he cites a drawing. As Margolis lay dying of cancer in 1993, he produced a sketch. He titled it Elizabeth. The drawing depicted a woman naked from the waist up with what appears to be a severed nipple and markings that may resemble stab wounds. Hidden within the shading of that drawing is the word Zodiac. Baber presented this drawing as a potential deathbed confession. And he is not alone in taking it seriously. Former NSA chief codemaker and codebreaker Ed Giorgio examined Baber's work and stated publicly that it checked out. Former NSA crypto mathematician Patrick Henry made a separate and striking discovery. He determined that the Zodiac cipher appeared to have been generated using a specific keyword. That keyword was Elizabeth. Two former NSA mathematicians, both independently connecting the Zodiac cipher to the name Elizabeth, the name of the woman Marvin Margolis had lived with before her murder. Former LAPD homicide detectives Mitzi Roberts and Rick Jackson reviewed Baber's findings and spoke publicly on podcasts, stating they had no doubt at all that Baber had identified the right individual. And in a significant institutional development, LAPD Police Chief Jim McDonnell was personally briefed on the Black Dahlia portion of the investigation in October of the relevant year. He directed his robbery homicide division to examine the findings. The Los Angeles Police Department confirmed to Newsweek that the investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder remains open, but there are significant counterpoints that must be stated clearly and fairly. Marvin Margolis was officially cleared of the Black Dahlia murder by the LAPD. He had an alibi on record. No law enforcement agency has publicly confirmed Baber's conclusions regarding either case. The FBI has not commented on the Margolis claim. And Margolis's son Rourke Merrill has denied the claims in their entirety. He described the theory as a speculative cesspool and stated simply, I do not believe that Dad did it. Marvin Margolis died on July 22, 1993, without ever being charged in connection with either case. Before we go any further, we must return to what this case is actually about. It is not about ciphers. It is not about letters. It is not about suspects. It is about people. Real people. With names. And ages. And first dates. And families who waited for answers. Betty Lou Jensen was 16 years old. She was an honor student. She was on her first date with David Faraday when she was shot 5 times in the back on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California on December 20, 1968. She was found 30 feet from the car. She had been running. David Arthur Faraday was 17 years old. He was a wrestler. He was Betty Lou's date that night when he was shot once in the head at point-blank range on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California on December 20, 1968. He was still alive when police arrived. He died on the way to hospital. They had only known each other for 2 weeks. Darlene Elizabeth Farron was 22 years old. She was popular in Vallejo. She was a mother. She was shot multiple times in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California in the early hours of July 5, 1969. She was pronounced dead at 12:40 in the morning. Michael Renaud Mageau was 19 years old when he was shot multiple times in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California alongside Darlene Farron. He survived. He was critically injured. He spent years carrying the weight of what he saw. And on August 16, 1991, 22 years after being shot, he sat in a room and looked at photographs. And pointed at one of them and said, "That's him. It's the man who shot me." Cecilia Ann Shepard was 22 years old. She was on a picnic at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California, on September 27, 1969, when a man in a hood and sunglasses appeared and stabbed her multiple times. She was taken to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa, California. She died on September 29, 1969. Brian Calvin Hartnell was 20 years old on September 27, 1969. He survived 8 stab wounds to his back at Lake Berryessa. He was one of only 2 people who ever saw the Zodiac face-to-face and lived. He provided investigators with critical details about what the Zodiac was wearing and how he moved and how he spoke. Paul Lee Stein was 29 years old. He was a PhD candidate. He was driving a taxicab for Yellow Cab Company in San Francisco to help finance his education. He was shot once in the head at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco at approximately 9:55 in the evening on October 11, 1969. His brother Joe Stein was 34 years old. He told the media that Paul had helped him financially toward his education and would have completed his postgraduate work in January. Joe Stein was so determined to respond to the killer who had taken his brother that he released his own work schedule and home address to the San Francisco Examiner. 5 dead. 2 survivors. Those are the names we know. But those are not all the names. Because the Zodiac himself in his final confirmed letter dated January 29, 1974 wrote a score at the bottom of the page. Me 37. SFPD 0. 37. That was his claim. Investigators have confirmed 5. Crime writer and researcher Robert Graysmith estimated the total at 49. The true number has never been determined. Between the 5 we know and the 37, the Zodiac claimed lie names that remain unconfirmed. And several of those suspected victims have names. On June 4, 1963, 18-year-old Robert Domingos and 17-year-old Linda Edwards drove to a beach near Gaviota in Santa Barbara County, California. It was senior ditch day at their high school. Like other seniors, they had chosen to spend the day at the beach. They were shot and killed. Investigators later identified similarities between their attack and the Zodiac's attack at Lake Berryessa 6 years later. On October 30, 1966, 18-year-old Sherry Jo Bates left a note for her father Joseph Bates reading, "Dad went to the RCC library." The next morning, her Volkswagen Beetle was found abandoned in the library parking lot at Riverside City College in Riverside, California. Her body was found nearby between 2 houses. She had been beaten, choked, and stabbed multiple times. Her throat had been slashed. Police found a man's Timex watch at the scene, a military boot print, and strands of hair in dried blood on the victim's hand. In April 1967, the Riverside newspaper, the Riverside Police Department, and Joseph Bates separately received nearly identical handwritten letters that read, "Bates had to die. There will be more," signed with a symbol resembling the letter Z. The Sherry Joe Bates case remains on the Riverside Police Department's cold case unit page to this day. The DNA evidence from under her fingernails remains in police custody and has not been made available to independent investigators. On September 6, 1970, 25-year-old nurse Donna Lass disappeared from State Line, Nevada. She had been working the night shift at the Sahara Hotel and Casino. The last entry in her work logbook was at 1:50 in the morning. An unidentified man later called Donna's employer and her landlord, claiming she had to leave town due to a family emergency. Her family confirmed there was no such emergency. That caller was never identified. Donna Lass had previously worked at Letterman General Hospital on the Presidio military base in San Francisco, the same area where the Zodiac shot cab driver Paul Stein. On March 22, 1971, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It included an advertisement from Forest Pines condominiums near Incline Village at Lake Tahoe. The words "Sought Victim 12" appeared alongside the Zodiac symbol. Investigators interpreted the postcard as the Zodiac claiming responsibility for Donna Lass's disappearance. In 1986, a skull was found in a drainage ditch near Emigrant Gap along California State Route 20 in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It sat unidentified for decades. In 2023, DNA profiling confirmed that skull belonged to Donna Lass. She disappeared in 1970. Her skull was found in 1986. It was not identified as hers until 2023. Between 1972 and 1973, at least 7 female hitchhikers were murdered in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa, California, in what became known as the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. The Zodiac was suspected of being responsible for those killings as well. A symbol found in the Zodiac's final confirmed letter dated January 29, 1974 matched Chinese characters found on a soy barrel that had been near one of the Santa Rosa victims. Arthur Lee Allen, the primary Zodiac suspect, was also independently investigated in connection with the Santa Rosa murders. In 1964, newlyweds Johnny and Joyce Swindle were shot on a road in San Diego, California. Their case has been considered as a possible early Zodiac attack. In June 1970, the Zodiac wrote to the San Francisco Chronicle claiming, "I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. That statement has been connected to the murder of San Francisco Police Department Sergeant Richard Raytick, who was shot through the window of his patrol car during a routine traffic stop. Raytick's murder remains unsolved. The San Francisco Police Department denies that the Zodiac is a suspect in his killing. And as far back as April 10, 1962, a cab driver named Raymond Davis was murdered in the gated community of St. Malo in Oceanside, California. Davis had told his dispatcher he was taking a fare to South Oceanside. The night before his body was found, an unidentified man had called police in Oceanside saying, "I am going to pull something here in Oceanside and you will never be able to figure it out." Raymond Davis was found murdered the next day. A taunting call to police before a murder. Cab driver. A random killing. 6 years before the confirmed Zodiac murders began. 5 confirmed dead. 2 survivors. 37 claimed. 49 estimated. And an unknown number of names we may never know. The Zodiac case did not stay inside police files. It spread. The case inspired the influential 1971 action film Dirty Harry starring Clint Eastwood just 2 years after the last confirmed Zodiac murder. In 2007, director David Fincher released the critically acclaimed film Zodiac, which remains one of the most detailed cinematic examinations of the case ever made. The Zodiac's influence reached beyond American cinema. He inspired copycat killers. In New York City, a man named Heriberto Seda committed a series of attacks and called himself the Zodiac. In Japan, a man named Shinichiro Azuma did the same. In 2021, an anonymous author sent letters to media outlets in Albany, New York, using the name The Chinese Zodiac Killer. In April 2025, a book titled Zodiac, The Final Cipher, was published. Written by a retired FBI profiler, the book claimed to contain previously undiscovered evidence about the identity of the Zodiac Killer. The author stated they had accessed never-before-seen police files and conducted interviews with key witnesses. No law enforcement agency has confirmed the book's conclusions. Earlier in 2025, the South by Southwest Zodiac Killer Project documentary series premiered. It featured interviews with surviving investigators, amateur sleuths, and family members of the victims. Its release brought a new wave of tips and public interest to the case. On October 23, 2024, Netflix released a 3-episode documentary series titled This is the Zodiac Speaking. It examined Arthur Lee Allen and introduced new testimony. It brought the case back into mainstream public consciousness over 55 years after the first murders on Lake Herman Road. Thousands of leads have come forward over the years. None have produced a confirmed identification. None have led to an arrest. None have brought the families of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday and Darlene Ferrin and Cecilia and Shepard and Paul Lee Stein any closer to the answer they deserve. Here is where this case stands today. The California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed as recently as 2021 that the Zodiac killer case remains active and open. Researcher and longtime case investigator Tom Voigt has claimed that as of 2025 the case is no longer being actively investigated. Two conflicting positions. Official channels say open. One longtime researcher says otherwise. That contradiction alone belongs on the record. The Z13 cipher remains unsolved. The Z32 cipher remains unsolved. The DNA profile developed in 2002 remains partial and unmatched. The GED match attempt produced no public results. The DNA evidence from under Sherry Jo Bates's fingernails remains in Riverside Police custody and has not been made available for independent analysis. Donna Lass's killer has never been identified despite her skull being identified by DNA in 2023. The Marvin Margolis theory is under review by the FBI with no public confirmation. The Gary Francis Post claim has been rejected by law enforcement, but the supporting DNA evidence in the Bates case remains withheld. Lawrence Kane was never charged. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992 with all evidence against him negative. The true identity of the person who wrote the words "This is the Zodiac Speaking" has never been confirmed. The answer to the question of who murdered Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday on Lake Herman Road on December 20, 1968 has never been given to their families. It is unknown why the killings stopped. It is possible the Zodiac died. It is possible he was imprisoned for other crimes. It is possible he simply stopped. Or it is possible that everything he wrote was designed to make us ask that question forever. There is a case number on a file in the California Department of Justice that has been open since 1969. Inside sealed evidence boxes there are stamps with envelopes. There is saliva on those stamps. Saliva from a person whose name we still do not know. Technology is advancing. Databases are growing. Forensic genetic genealogy is producing results in cases that were cold for decades. There are people working this case quietly and methodically right now. And it is possible that somewhere in those databases or in those evidence boxes or in a file that has never been properly cross-referenced the answer already exists. It has always existed. It is simply waiting to be found. Lake Herman Road, Benicia, California. December 20, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old. Running. That is where the story begins. And until someone finally answers the question that nobody has answered in over 50 years, that cold December road in Benicia, California, is still where it ends. Thank you for watching Truth Finder Afiz. If this case moved you, share it with someone who has never heard the full story. Because these names deserve to be remembered. Betty Lou Jensen, David Arthur Faraday, Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, Cecilia and Shepard, Paul Lee Stein. Subscribe to Truth Finder Afiz. Drop your location in the comments. Tell us what you think happened to the Zodiac. And tell us which case you want us to investigate next. We will be back, because there are other files, other names, other roads, and other questions no one has answered yet. We begin again soon.